How you doing, folks? You okay? I know you're stressed, you're worried, you're tired, you're angry, you're frustrated. Unless, of course, you're happy that Joe Biden was just dragged across the finish line by the media. And listen, I think the biggest casualty thus far in this election cycle has been essentially the nail in the coffin for people's trust in our institutions. This isn't new. We've been talking about it on Whiskey Politics now for over 4 years. The level of distrust in our media, the level of distrust in our academia, in our institutions, including the FBI and the DOJ. It was already low. Our trust level was already low. But as a democracy, we hold ourselves up high compared to many countries around the world, knowing that we will always have a free and fair election. 2016 was a free and fair election. The Democrats would not accept it. They still don't accept it. And they truly believed, and they tried to make you believe, that it was Russian collusion and interference and everything else. And that was the narrative for 4 years. And now we are at the end of a situation that started 8 months ago, where the Democrats took a look at COVID, the Rona, as I call it, and they decided that a crisis can never go to waste. We're going to use this to take the election back into 2020. And that's exactly what they did. We know this. We've been talking about this for really much of the last year here at Whiskey Politics. Almost every guest that I've had on has gotten a question from me about the potential for voter fraud. And almost to a guest, every single one of them have come back and said that it's a major concern, that they're going to the courts. And it was ultimately up to the judges to determine what states like Philadelphia could do with post-dating ballots and all sorts of shenanigans that were taking place. Well, to talk about all this, Jackson Darr is a Republican political strategist who has run campaigns at the federal, state, and local level. He's got particular interest in the specialty in voting coalition trends. Jackson is also an editor at RRH, that's Red Racing Horse Elections, the world's largest right-leaning elections blog. Welcome back to the show, Jackson. How are you?
I'm great. Great to be back, Dave.
I was thinking about it this morning before we turned on the cameras here. I saw you a year ago at another event. I think you and I sat down at the CPAC right after the election that Donald Trump won in 2016. So that would have been about January 2017, correct?
Yep. That was the last time we sat down.
Wow, that's incredible. So we've seen quite a lot of changes. We've seen quite a lot to our political system over the past 4 years. Before we start talking about this particular election, let me just kind of get your perspective on the last few years that we've seen with Donald Trump in the White House. What have your thoughts been?
I mean, my thoughts have been sort of twofold. One, I think a lot of good policy has gotten done. I'm mostly here for elections, but I do care about policy, and I thought the tax bill was pretty great. I thought that they almost got the healthcare stuff done. They did get rid of the individual mandate, which was good. If McCain hadn't changed his vote at the last second, they would have gotten the healthcare stuff done. I think the judicial stuff has been honestly some of the best that's ever been done, not just in quality, but people miss the quantity. The amount that Trump and McConnell managed to get done is kind of crazy. If you look back at the statistics over the years, they just ran them through. They made it a priority. And that's going to be a huge effect going forward because that's going to last for decades. On the other side, Trump is Trump. And so, he's going to tweet, right? He's going to say stuff. Sometimes it's really good. Sometimes maybe it's not. But I think the policy was worth it.
Yeah. Well, I've been saying all along that this is a decision, a binary choice between policy and personality. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are in this country that just got caught up in the personality, whether you like it or not, of Donald Trump. And thus we have the results of this particular election. But let's talk about these results here because as we're speaking right now, the media have called it for Joe Biden. We knew that was coming. They did it in lockstep together. But I've got some questions for you. Okay, so first of all, for our audience, tell us a little bit about your analysis of things, what you do, and you call yourself jokingly a data monkey. You really get into the numbers, don't you?
I do. So a little bit about the analysis. Honestly, a lot of people are going to say, Monte Carlo simulations and all this stuff, and that's good, but especially when you're trying to turn out voters and things like that. But really, what it comes down to is you have to have sort of an understanding of, okay, in this situation, how might this kind of person react? Could be from a personality perspective. You could break it down by type of personality, age, race, general political outlook, income. You can break it down by a whole bunch of things, and you sort of have to be able to factor all those in. You can put numbers down on a sheet of paper, but there's a lot of sort of old world guesstimation that goes into it, frankly. And but if you've seen enough data over enough time, not just at the national, state, and county level, but even down to the precinct level, and and understand the culture of different areas and what the mix of people is there, you can sort of start putting that in with a little bit of polling data and things like that. Whether it's good or not, we'll talk about that in a minute. But because the polls have some explaining to do this time, but you can but they got a few things right, and you can sort of start to get an idea of if then, if this then, if that then.
Okay.
And it was certainly very interesting at the time.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the anomalies, and I want to get into the polling as well with you as well, because that's something that you focus on as a career. But let's talk about this for a minute. You were seeing these massive anomalies that are taking place, where you've got coding issues taking place in Michigan. You've got a 6,000 vote. They call it a glitch. That's 1 out of 47 counties in Michigan that apparently has that software. That software is apparently being used in handfuls of other states around the country. All of the swing states are using this software that apparently had a glitch, all in the favor of Joe Biden. None of these glitches, quote unquote, went in the favor of Donald Trump. What are your thoughts on what we're seeing right now with, I think it's Dominion software? Is that the name of it?
Yes, that is the name of it. So the one you specifically mentioned is Antrim County. Now, you're right. All the errors seem to be going in one direction. They are being found, at least a lot of them, being corrected. I will point out that Antrim County, where that one in Michigan took place, I don't think it was especially intentional by the county leaders or anything like that, simply because it's a Republican county. All the local office holders are Republicans. So it's not like they did this on purpose, at least the county themselves, these individual counties.
It would be inherent in the coding and the algorithms and the software, right?
Right.
And that comes from one place.
Right, exactly. So it's the company, right?
Right.
And luckily it's not being used in a ton of places. They will correct the errors, right? I think they shouldn't be used by anyone again. It's obviously a really flawed system because it's caused multiple errors in multiple counties, right? It's a transposing problem. And hopefully we won't have any of that going on again, but it does cause some extra confusion, which is not good for our democracy.
So this Antrim County, which I never heard of until this week, I guess there was 18, it's a small community. There was 18,000 ballots returned. That's a small number. This is 6,000. This is 33%. 1/3 apparently had the glitch. Does that number equate across the board to other counties at that same ratio?
So I've only really looked into one of the other ones, and it really has to do, it's different percentages in different places because the actual numbers are different in different places. So with Antrim County, it's a pretty Republican county. So when they corrected 3,000 more for Trump and 3,000 less for Biden. That's because of what the margin was in that county. With the other counties that use the software, that's going to correct differently depending on how Trump and Biden actually did in those counties.
Okay. All right. So we've got the software as an issue. Let's talk a little bit about the mail-in. Okay. If you've been watching our show for the past year, almost every episode I've had, there's been a question to our guest regarding the potential for voter fraud due to the mail-in ballots that have been promulgated mostly by the left under the guise of the coronavirus, the COVID. And that many of these states have never done mail-in ballots at the level that was going to be done, that they've never done even a dress rehearsal. Some states have, Florida, for example, and we got their results within a few hours. But many of these states don't. And there's reports that are now coming out, for example, in the state of Pennsylvania, which is obviously a contested state, it is showing that in 2016, the state rejected 1% of mail-in ballots because they were either fraudulent or they were just bad ballots. This year, we are seeing thus far 0.003% that have been rejected. And the number of mail-in ballots is exponential compared to what it was in 2016. So what does that tell you when we're taking a look at the legitimacy of this vote right now, where 30 times the rate predicted by historical rejection numbers, Pennsylvania is, we're seeing 30 times less.
So I think it's really two questions. It's, okay, should there be a higher rejection rate? And then does it cause a legitimacy problem? So on the first question, I think the answer is very much yes. Maybe not even 1%, but there should be a higher rejection rate simply because, as you point out, that is what we see historically. That means it's a lot of times voter fraud is real, right? It happens. It doesn't always happen as much as people think they do, or in the way, or for the reasons that they think it does. A lot of times it's local elections doing crazy stuff, but it happens, right? And then there's stuff that isn't even fraud. There's stuff that has to do with signatures. I know there's been a couple of court cases arguing about signatures, some of which have gone forward, some of which have been rejected. A lot of those ballot rejections in the past were because there was no signature on the outside of the ballot, depending on your state laws, or the signature didn't match what the state had on file. A lot of people's signatures for those absentee ballots, because they hadn't voted absentee before, are not on file with the state, as far as I know, at least in Pennsylvania. So the lack of a normal ballot rejection rate is certainly problematic and concerning. As far as legitimacy goes, remember, some of those rejected ballots would have been cast for Trump, right? The majority probably be cast for Biden, but some of them would have been cast for Trump. I think that if they had rejected more of the ballots, that more of the ones that probably should be rejected for those stated reasons, and also remember they extended the deadline for when ballots to come in, and there is going to be a lawsuit over that, and I think there's a good case there, and that may also be why the rate is so high, right? So I would think that if you had the normal ballot rejection rate, that Pennsylvania would be even closer, but I think Biden would still squeak it out. So the legitimacy of the overall result, at least in Pennsylvania, I don't think is really, in my opinion, isn't really in doubt. Now, Georgia's very, very close right now. Biden is leading. There's not a lot of ballots left. They're mostly scattered in small rural counties. They're going to be a little bit nicer to Trump. Some of them are Dem, some of them are R. Georgia, a higher ballot rejection rate might actually flip it, right? So I don't know what's going on with lawsuits and things there, but I think they've got a much more important possible case for legitimacy of that in Georgia.
Let's get back to Pennsylvania here for a minute, because when we're talking about Pennsylvania, we are talking about a massive number of mail-in ballots. And I don't, so listen, I went to grad school, economics degree. I took my stats classes, and that's where I left it. I haven't focused on stats in almost 3 decades, right? So educate me if you can, please, because I don't really understand when we're talking about the mass number of anomalies, that you have massive data dumps that all go in one direction for one candidate. For example, 138,000 votes that was suddenly dumped in to the Michigan returns, okay, in the middle of the night when they shut down the polls. When they shut down the polls at the same time Wisconsin, there was another 100,000 that came in, all for Biden. In Pennsylvania, we're seeing similar situations as well. And a lot of people are suggesting that while historically, when you have 1% of the mail-in votes that are rejected, that this year it should be closer to 3% because there were so many games, there were so many shenanigans played with, day of voting and day of registration and random buckets just showing up out of nowhere, and post office leaving ballots, in buckets behind apartment buildings, and all of the reports that we're seeing. And there's literally thousands of these reports. It's almost too many to catalog here. That a lot of people are suggesting that rejection rate should be closer to 3%. But when you're dealing with, in the low thousands, that is making the difference in this election in Pennsylvania, and we are rejecting 0.003% instead of anywhere between 1% and 3%. That would make a difference, Jackson, no?
At a 3% rate, yes, it would make a difference. It would definitely put everything into doubt. Remember, some of those ballots will still be for Trump, but most of them will still be for Biden, right? So it won't be 100%. It won't be 3% knocked off of Biden. It would maybe be 1%, right? Or 2%. But at that 2%, suddenly everything starts to change, right? So I'll address those sort of separately. So this year, because of all the stuff with mail-in, because of more and more mail-in because of COVID, there were always going to be more, some would say shenanigans, and some of them probably were shenanigans. And some humans, many humans are not very smart. All humans are kind of dumb. And even very smart humans can only do, a certain amount. Basically, because the system was so untried in so many states, there are going to be anomalies. Some of them are going to be malicious. Some of them are not going to be malicious and not really hurt anyone. And then some of them are not going to be malicious, but will hurt someone. But hey, it's convenient. Oh, it happened to happen that way, right? We won't certify all these. It's COVID. We'll just get the ballots, okay, and we'll just count them. Now, as far as Michigan goes, a lot of those late, and really Wisconsin too, those late ballots were from Detroit and Milwaukee. Those are very Democratic cities. And frankly, the Democrats, decided this time, because Republicans understandably didn't trust the mail ballots as much, a lot of them voted in person early or in person on election day, which meant that when the in-person stuff came in, it was very Republican, right? And you saw Biden sort of chipping it down as they counted all the mail ballots. Well, the city of Milwaukee, and I think they made a terrible decision here, the city of Milwaukee decided, we've got 166,000 mail ballots. They initially decided they were not going to count them night of, right? They initially said, we're doing it next day. We're not doing it right now. Do it in the morning. Then they got excited, frankly. They got excited because they realized, hey, Wisconsin's close enough that if we count these right now, people might wake up in the morning and, hey, Biden's won Wisconsin magically, right? Seems like magic. And that was a terrible decision to make, because if people are watching the counting as it happens, votes come in, a few more votes come in, a few more votes come in, they trust it a lot more than if suddenly they just appear overnight. Of course, they got counted gradually, but you didn't see that because you were asleep. None of us saw it.
Yeah, but we weren't asleep. I've been up for 3 nights. So so you're saying that was by design, based upon when they thought people would perceive it?
Well, no, that's the thing. It wasn't originally, but they changed their minds. They were going to count it, Wednesday afternoon or whatever, late Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon in Milwaukee. And then they just decided, oh, it's so close. It's so close. We just need to count them now, which I think was a terrible decision from an optics standpoint. But because they're from a huge city, and because they were more late arriving mail ballots, they're going to be overwhelmingly Democratic. I mean, 90-10 is not weird for that at all, because so many Dems vote.
We saw this going back to 2012. We saw precincts in Philadelphia that came in 100% for Romney. overall there was a handful that were for Romney at the end when it was all said and done. But you had these large numbers of votes that came in, these returns, and it was like 0 votes for Romney. Is that statistically possible?
It is in some places. I will say there has been a long question in Philadelphia of possible, not large cheating for this, but cheating at the margins. I personally know someone, actually a couple, who live in one of the precincts in Philadelphia where Obama got 100% of the vote, and they went and voted a straight Republican ticket. And I know them. They live in that precinct. I can verify that. Mm-hmm. Now, in the ones where it looks like the Republican votes were counted, there were like 12 of them in a precinct, right? So it's not like huge cheating, but it's possible that there's cheating going on at the very margins there.
Again, we're talking about swing states here where we are at the margins, statistically speaking. I mean, a handful of 1,000 votes here, a handful of 1,000 votes there, that turns the election. Do you go to manual recount in every single one of these counties where there's concerns, do you think?
So the Trump campaign, I believe, will pursue a manual recount in Wisconsin. They are under that. They're under that 0.5%, because I think Biden is only up 20,000 in Wisconsin. So they're under that 0.5% threshold. The challenger does have to pay for the recount, and I believe the Trump campaign is going to do that. So there will be a manual recount in Wisconsin. I am not sure about Pennsylvania and Michigan. I believe there's a manual recount threshold in Michigan too, and I assume the campaign will do that, but I haven't read the specifics. For Pennsylvania, I don't know if there's a provision for manual recount or not.
And in Georgia, they're going automatically to a manual recount.
They're going automatically to it. It is that close. And that one, all the stuff you're talking about, for Wisconsin, maybe. For Pennsylvania and Michigan, I don't know. But for Georgia, it certainly matters. And let's not forget, Arizona's still counting ballots.
Yeah.
Right? The last batch, Trump won it. It wasn't as good for him, but there's still a lot of Republican-leaning ballots coming in. And while it may end up that Biden looks like he's winning Arizona by a couple thousand votes, they might go to recount there too.
How does a Pennsylvania and the Attorney General and the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania, the day before the election, say that when all the votes are counted, Joe Biden wins this state?
I mean, hubris and stupidity.
When it's this close,
hubris and stupidity.
Doesn't it mean that they believe it's cooked already?
They might have seen registration, right? So they might be able to see registration statistics. Some states we can see that, some can't. So they can make a prediction. Of course, they don't know how the independents are going to vote, but Pennsylvania doesn't have that many independents. It's certainly a terrible thing for them to say, and maybe there is something in there cooking something. But remember, most of this is handled by counties, and most of the counties in Pennsylvania are Republican. Mm-hmm. So they could say, let's say for the sake of argument, I'm not saying they have this, but let's say they have an extra 10,000 votes up their sleeve in Philadelphia, right? Well, they can't have that in, name rural random county in Pennsylvania because the local Republicans aren't doing that, wouldn't allow that, right? That's the thing with Pennsylvania. It's a couple blue islands and a bunch of red. It very much mirrors America that way. Mm-hmm. And so maybe there's something going on in Philly with a few extra ballots, but Biden's winning by more than that. And he's winning by more than that because, the rural counties got a couple extra percent for Trump. Biden did a little bit better in his old hometown of Scranton, and the suburbs, although the bottom didn't fall out as much as we thought they would, they did get a bit more for Biden. That's what had happened. So maybe there are a few thousand fraudulent votes in Philadelphia. I wouldn't put it past him, but I don't think it's enough to say that that's the reason.
You don't think it's enough? There's Philadelphia, and there's also Pittsburgh, which is Allegheny County, and
right.
And so I think that. We are such low numbers right now that anybody coming in and doing a manual recount. The problem is garbage in, garbage out, Jackson. If they're going to be doing a manual recount, aren't a lot of those ballots that have been updated by poll workers? We've seen poll workers filling in blank ballots. Some of them have been thrown away already. Doesn't that impact the result of a recount?
It does impact the result of a recount, and yes, we have seen things like that. What I'm trying to sort of get to with all of this is, yes, there are shenanigans going on. There's crazy stuff going on, stuff that shouldn't be going on. And frankly, if they weren't, I think it would gain Trump a few there, a few there. It might even flip Georgia. We'll see on that. The Republicans are in charge in Georgia, so the recount should be a little bit more fair, right? Even though at county level, of course, some of them are Democratic, but at the state level, you'll have, you know, a watchdog. There are definitely irregularities going on, but in most modern U.S. elections, granted this is a little bit different because of COVID, the rate of fraud and the rate of screw up is low enough that it wouldn't make a difference in something that is not as close to, say, Georgia or than Arizona might end up being.
Yeah, but I'd like to listen. You're the data guy, and so I'm not challenging you on that, but I have to ask you because I don't quite understand this. We've never done this before. We've never had this sheer number of mail-in ballots before. Historically speaking, mail-in ballots have always been a very low percentage of the total number of ballots. Most people go to the polling place. And what they did was essentially create this massive concern over going to polls. So, you know, using COVID as an excuse so that everybody now has to use mail-in ballots. And the percentages are huge. We've never seen that before. There are irregularities with mail-in ballots. You can't trace every mail-in ballot. There are bucket loads of fraudulent votes that come in. And how do you control that when you're dealing with such mass numbers? And it's like a seven-headed hydra. You've got, as you correctly stated, multiple counties that are controlled by different, different parties all across the country under different states. I guess this is two questions for you. We've never seen this before, so how can we use existing statistics from previous elections to determine what this election should look like? And secondly, I'm a 10th Amendment guy, okay? But listen, we go to the airport, we have to abide by TSA standards. When I buy meat, I'm abiding, or the meat packing company is abiding by USDA standards. Should we not have a national standard for voting across the country?
So I'm going to say we shouldn't, and here's why. Now, as you correctly point out, it makes the problems myriad. And in this specific year, with all these mail ballots, does it increase the chance for shenanigans and mistakes that just happen to go one way or the other? It does. However, I would say that it's better to have it in the state's hands for two reasons. One, while you might get instances of individual fraud at the state or county level, especially on the margins, but sometimes even a bit more, you can't have systematic nationwide fraud. It's impossible under our system. You can't have fraud everywhere. It can't be done. No one can steal an election from the federal level because there's no federal control of elections, right? That's one. Two, if you implement a national voting system, you take away one of the arguments for keeping the Electoral College, right? With a national voting system where everyone's voting under the same rules and in the same way, all the same standards, it's much easier to implement a popular vote only non-electoral college system. I'm for keeping the
why would the two be disassociated?
So because if someone is saying to you, I want to get rid of the electoral college, one of your strongest arguments is, well, you can't, because voting rules of when polls are open, how ballots are counted, what the standards are for mail ballots, what the standards are for what machines we use, what votes get thrown out, which ones don't. They're different in every state. When a vote is acceptable, is it acceptable after the election because it was already in the mail? Does it have to be in by election day? What are the rules for provisional ballots? They're all different for every state, and it basically makes getting rid of the electoral college logistically impossible because not every vote would technically be the same, right? And you have to have every vote to be the same to have a popular vote only election.
I'm not sure I'm following.
Very complicated and very technical.
Okay, so the Electoral College, basically the state assemblies, they have to determine who the electors are going to be. And there's some on the right now suggesting, Mark Levin, for example, is suggesting that, that the state legislatures determine that with all this fraud that's happening right now, that they determined that their electors go for Trump. They can do what they want. It is their state. But why would a national standard on when ballots are allowed in. You're not allowed to have ballots in after 8 p.m. on election night. And, how many days until they have to be in postmarked by election day. Those are some simple standards. Why would that impact the decisions made by the state legislatures?
They would impact that because it would call into question their right to have that decision in the first place if the system becomes nationalized from a legal standpoint. Also, remember, you and I can say we should have a national standard. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, you and I say we should have a national standard that ballots come in at this time or they're not counted, right? And this time is election day and they have to be in by election day, right? Okay, great. Then we lose power the next time, and the Democrats come in and say, oh, you can take them a week after for the entire country, instead of them coming in one state and saying that, right?
Okay.
It's sort of a camel's nose under the tent problem.
Gotcha. So, yeah, okay, I see that, and that's a legitimate point. And you don't want the politics of one presidential administration determining the voting for 50 states.
Yeah, it would make it easier to cheat, frankly.
Gotcha. Okay. What's going on with North Carolina? They stopped it, they said that they're going to need a few more days. It hasn't moved. It's definitely in Trump's favor right now. Why? I don't remember that being an issue for North Carolina before in previous elections.
So, yeah, they do have some outstanding mail ballots, but don't worry, North Carolina is not going to be a huge problem. So they've got 117 or 119 between that. They're not sure. I think 119 is with provisionals. Mail and provisional ballots that are still unreturned.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That doesn't mean they're going to be returned. Some of them will not be returned. Some of them will not come in before North Carolina's cut off. Mm-hmm. Okay. So Tom Tillis in the Senate, he's leading by so much that it's basically impossible. Let's say all of them came in and went for the Democrat.
Right.
Doesn't matter. They would literally all have to come in, which not all of them are going to come in, and then they would all have to go for the Democrats. So he's.
But why does North Carolina? We've got a national election, okay? Right. It's Tuesday, November the 3rd, and they're setting meetings for 7, 8, 10 days after the election for them to sit down and give their results. Why is that? Listen, Florida and Texas and Ohio and these other big states can get their numbers in the night of the election. Right. Why are we seeing this?
So you just named Florida and Texas and Ohio, and I think Ohio and Texas did take another like 24 hours or whatever, but it was pretty quick. Here's the reason, and I'll tell you the reason. The reason is that right now in North Carolina, even though it is a right-leaning state, Democrats are in control of the state government and they're in control of the state Supreme Court. In Florida, Texas, and Ohio, you've got complete Republican control of all three branches. Mm-hmm. In North Carolina, you've got Republican control of the legislature, but the governor is a Democrat, and the courts are controlled by the Democrats. Now, actually, we're leading 3 of the state Supreme Court races right now. We might flip it, or at least get it much closer on the state Supreme Court in North Carolina, and then some of those problems might go away. But they decided that their rule is they're going to allow it a certain number of days after Election Day to see if they come in, as long as they are postmarked by Election Day. And yeah, again, in a Republican state like Ohio, Florida, Texas, yeah, they're going to do it the right way. In a Democratic state, they're going to try to, the mail is slow, it's overloaded, they got it in, trying to get those extra votes in because they know they're going to be for them. It's at the margins. And, unfortunately, several years ago when the governorship was up and when the state Supreme Court races were up, we didn't do as well, and these are the consequences.
Last question for you, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time, Jackson.
No problem.
Media's called. We knew the media was going to call this for Biden. They came in all at the exact same moment to call it for Biden. We're looking right now at manual recounts. We're looking at a series of events that are going to unfold over the next several weeks under tremendous pressure from the national media, from the tech titans, from academia, from corporations, and from, realistically speaking, half the country that voted for Biden and some people that voted for Trump who are now saying, all right, let's move on already. We don't need a national crisis. What do you think now takes place over the next coming weeks?
So whether we need or don't need a national crisis, I think a little bit of some kind of thing will take place. There's going to be, as you point out, lawsuits. I think some of them are going to be more successful than others. We'll have to see about the one about how many days after Pennsylvania can accept votes, because the law says one thing and the state Supreme Court said another one. And when it went up to the Supreme Court, they said, well, basically, we'll find out if it matters. Well, it looks like it might matter, so that one might succeed. National crisis, I mean, I think that Trump is going to try to hold on as long as he can, is going to pursue every avenue, whether it's a good idea or not. And so I don't think it's kind of a choice that we have. I think it's just, something that's going to happen. I don't believe the people that say that if we get to January and, it turns out he did lose, that, he's just going to refuse to leave or something like that. I think that's ridiculous. You've got Democrats who have this fever dream of the Secret Service hauling him out by his tie. And I just don't think that's going to happen. But I do think that, yeah, it's going to undermine confidence in the system even more. It's going to do that. And basically, we are in a cycle. The last thing I'd leave everybody with is, look, if you want to know what's going on right now, basically what the trajectory is, look at the 1880s, okay? In the 1880s, we had sky-high turnout. This time, we had 15% higher turnout in 2016, highest turnout we've had in all of our lifetimes, pretty much. Sky-high close elections, high partisanship, which they had in the 1880s, leads to sky-high turnout. Remember, it was post-Civil War. There was a lot of, bad feelings in the country. And how did it end? Well, it didn't end with another civil war, which some people were talking about at the time. It ended when one party won a decisive victory for a couple elections in a row, and then everyone sort of started resetting to the new normal, and it took a while, and that was the Republican Party that won a big victory in the early 1890s in a congressional election. It was such a huge victory, the Democrats split, and it reset American politics for a while, where it wasn't really that close for a while until Roosevelt came along. So basically what we're sitting here doing is just waiting for that one big event. Basically, we're waiting for one party or the other to split, or one party to piss off, do something so heinous that it pisses off part of the electorate so much that, it's just sort of gone. And we're going to keep escalating until that happens. That's my prediction.
Well, that took 20 to 30 years until Roosevelt came in, from what you're talking about happening.
Right,
so,
but that was after the Republicans had already gotten a big majority for 20 or 30 years. So
gotcha.
What I mean is, this is likely to happen in the next 5 years or so.
Gotcha. Well, that's going to be interesting because as it stands right now, the Republicans keep control of the Senate. We almost have parity in the House. There's several
very good House election.
Yeah, I mean, that was stunning for the Democrats. There's a lot of internal fighting going on right now. So you're going to see that split between the progressives, the socialist wing of the Democrat Party, and the moderate, more establishment wing. And I don't see that dying down anytime soon, because AOC plus 150 is definitely a threat to the Democrats. But in the meantime, there's a lot of people in this country, and I've been talking about this for quite some time, and open up the show with this. There's a lot of people in this country, Jackson, that have a serious issue with trust in our institutions now. And this election, we talk about legitimacy, and there's a lot of people in this country whereby the Democrats considered Trump illegitimate for their reasons. A lot of people I'm talking to right now do not view Biden-Harris as a legitimate president. They believe that this was shoved down our throat, foie gras style, that everything was leading up to this for the past 8 months, that the Democrats never allow a crisis to go to waste, using their own words, Rahm Emanuel. Okay. And what you saw with the lead up using coronavirus was that this was intentional, that they knew that they were going to win this in the margins of mail-in ballots, and that there is no way for the Republicans, the lawyers, and the courts to get a full accounting of what took place. And this was a slow motion car crash that happened in front of all of our eyes, and we watched it. And everybody that I'm speaking to on the right now views this as an illegitimate. And they'll accept him, from the standpoint of, okay, let's do this and move on. We're going to get them in 2022 and 2024, but they don't view this. So we've got a trust deficit in this country.
Right. And as I said, that will not end until one party gets a couple resounding victories in a row.
Yeah.
and resets everything. That's when it'll end, and that's just sort of the trajectory that we're on.
Jackson Darr. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I will say this one more thing. I know you're out there in California, right? Or have you moved?
Yep.
The
Still.
Republicans are on track to hold Mike Garcia's seat if everything goes
Yep,
okay.
25th district.
Ballot, right? And we are going to pick up at least 2, if not 3 seats in California. It has not been in my lifetime that we could have said that.
Well, here's the problem with that, because you got you're referring to Orange County primarily. Young Moon, I think the Korean woman, she won in 2018. She was actually on her way to House orientation in Washington, D.C., and they called the election back a month later.
Right.
So ballot harvesting is a clear and present danger.
Right. So actually this year, the California GOP decided they were going to fight fire with fire and do their own ballot harvesting, which means that the late ballots coming in for the first time in the history of ever, the late ballots coming in are actually more Republican.
Interesting. Well, let's hope that sticks. And Mike Garcia, 25th district, that was Katie Hill's district, the Threppler for our audience that remember her. They flipped it in the special election, but that would be a good keep for them right there as well. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about possibly being 3-4 seats shy when this is all said and done of having control of Congress. Mm-hmm. So this is good. Jackson Darr, tell everybody where they could find you online, your social media, Red Racing Horse blog as well, please.
Right. So you can find me writing usually on Mondays at RRH Elections. If you have any interest in the actual news of elections, we are the biggest right-leaning elections blog in the world. We even cover international stuff, everything from president down to local dog catcher, basically. And aside from Snapchat, I don't use social media, so find me there.
On Snapchat? Okay. All right. And it's Red Racing Horse blog, is it? RRH Elections? RRHelections.com? Okay. Yeah. Jackson Darr, greatly appreciate you taking the time, and we'll have you back on again down the road. I'm sure there's going to be further elections that we're going to be looking at that are going to be considered contested as well. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Love to see you then, Dave. Bye.
Thanks, Jackson. Folks, I've always been an eternal optimist, a glass half full person. I've gone through some significant challenges in my life. If you know me, if you're friends with me, you know some of the things that I've had to deal with. And I don't talk about them here on the show. And yet I get up every morning and I look to the sunrise, not to the sunset. I believe that we truly, truly can determine the outcomes of our lives if we work hard enough and make things happen. But as we've been talking about over the past 4.5 years, as a naturalized immigrant to this country, I've always held the firm belief that America sets the bar for ideals of freedom and democracy around the world. That people from around the world all want to come to the United States. You have much fewer people leaving the United States to other countries than you have people wanting to come here. And it's because of the ideals of democracy and free markets. And being a constitutional republic, you're protected by our Constitution. But the dwindling level of trust or the growing level of distrust that more and more people have in this country regarding our institutions, the FBI, the DOJ, our academia, sending mind-numb robots that have been propagandized by leftist institutions out into our media and into our corporations, is now, unfortunately, hitting critical mass. If we do not have trust in our electoral process, then it's over. The experiment, America, it's over. The fact is that the Democrats never let a crisis go to waste, to quote Rahm Emanuel. And when they saw Rona was coming around the corner, they knew that they were going to perpetuate the fear to keep us locked down, to impact the economy, so that Trump was now going into a recession in an election year, and then to use mail-in balloting to give them the edge. Because it is historically proven, every single statistic shows approximately 1% of mail-in balloting are fraud. 1%. Now, some statistics are coming out this year and showing it may be as high as 3%. But that 1% is of a very small number compared to the total number of people that go into ballots and vote historically. So it never, for those people that were studying the numbers, really ever made that much of a difference. 1% of mail-in ballots, if the number of mail-in ballots are low, it's going to be negligible. But what if we're at 60, 70, 80, 90% in some cases of the ballots that are coming in are not people going to the polls, but are mail-in? And we're using that same ratio of 1%, and some people are now saying 3%. That makes the difference in the election. Listen, my degrees in business, graduate degrees in business, I took statistics. Okay, 3 classes of statistics, and I'm not a mathematician. When we see mass numbers of votes coming in and added to the rolls that are 100% for Biden, you know there's a problem. Somebody said on Twitter, you can flip a coin 138 times, and if it comes up 138 heads in a row, you know there's a problem. So you don't need a graduate degree in anything. You don't need a 4th grade education to see that there's something wrong there. So the legitimacy of the vote is what holds us together as a country. If you do not trust the institutions, and especially the democracy that allows us to check and balance those institutions, then the experiment is over. We need to audit every single vote in every contested precinct where there could be potential fraud. I'm sorry, you can't have millions and millions of ballots coming in and have a few thousand going one way or another without contesting it. Yeah, 20,000 even out of millions of ballots, when there is a history of fraud, when there is accusations of fraud, when there is proof of fraud, when you've got whistleblowers coming out and saying that they were ordered to backdate, when you're seeing glitches in computer systems that were wholesale in one direction, all for Joe Biden. Who wrote that code? How many precincts and states is that code in? You cannot certify an election until those questions are answered. This isn't about Trump. It isn't. I have always said Trump is a placeholder. As much as I like his policies and disagree with some of his, some of his behavior, as most people do, I agreed with his policies, but this isn't about that anymore. This is about the faith of the integrity of our republic. If you do not trust that your vote will count, or that your vote will not be offset and canceled out by ghosts, by phantoms, then where does that leave us as a country? This is how Venezuela fell. Maduro. Listen, I'm frustrated and I'm angry and I'm worried. Yeah, and I know everybody on the left and the media and even some establishment Republicans are saying, okay, we've got to come together, let's call for unity and so on. Where was the Democrats' unity in 2016 through 2020? They weren't in office. They made up stories out of whole cloth about Russian collusion, Steele dossiers, Ukrainian phone calls, impeachment. Where was their unity? So, yeah, I'm an optimist, and I'm also a realist. And being a realist, we've been having some serious discussions here at Whiskey Politics whether or not we continue the show. And the reason for that being is that I'm deeply worried about how the agencies are going to be used by this upcoming administration, looks like, to go after enemies, to go after voices of dissent. We saw this under the Obama administration. We saw how they used the agencies to go after people, audit them. We saw James Rosen and other journalists. I don't think we're that big. I don't think we have that much of a powerful voice that they're going to go after us right away. But I also believe that that's a slippery slope. And so we're having some serious talks right now. We've been talking, it's nothing new. We've been talking for months. What happens if? Because we know what these people want to do. They're going to make lists. They are making lists. They've made lists. And now it's time for vengeance. So while I am a glass half full optimist, I also have to say to you right now that if you're not fighting this, and if you're not worried about this, and if you've capitulated, if you've just turned it all off because you've had enough, because you're exhausted, 3-4 nights of sleep, sleepless nights, worried, watching it all crumble as far as the presidency, and you're just going to turn it off, that's what they want you to do. And they'll win. And they'll win in 2022 and 2024 and 2026 and 8. That's their goal. They will eventually take back the Senate. They will stack the courts. They will add 2 or 3, 4 states, however many Guam, American Samoa. I mean, what's to stop them? This is their game plan. It's 100% full control. Full control of the media, full control of corporate America, full control of the markets, full control of your speech, full control of academia, full control of your rights, full control of you. I'm not okay with it. And if you're one of those people that are just go along to get along, we'll get them next time, they're not going to make the systemic changes that need to be made to prevent fraud. They will not. All right, folks. Have a good week. We'll be back again, at least for now, next time, to talk more about this. We're going to see how this progresses over the next coming weeks until everything is certified, and we'll go from there, determine exactly what we need to do. Cheers.